areas. He is from Australia, and he has experience, at Australian universities, the UK, and the Far East. Professor Dunleavy is a professor of accounting, and he's the president of the Teachers Union at his university. Professor, the ball is yours. You will have 12 minutes, after which I will alert you that your 12 minutes are up, and then we'll go into questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's 1:45 where I am in Australia, and so I might not be here for the end of the conference because I'll probably be asleep. Let's get on. Only one slide in front of you, which are the headings of the chapter sections that the root problem that the universities are facing is exacerbated by COVID, but it was there before. And that root problem is that universities began in an age when only the very, very privileged got educated. And when we progressed to mass education, we assumed all around the world that all we needed to do was to make available the kind of things that elite education had got, and that would mean that there would be lots more qualified people and a much fairer society. The golden age of elite education, golden for those who got it, of course, was small classes, individual attention, and the university experience, living on campus, meeting people, being as important as the knowledge, the discipline stuff that was absorbed. As we moved to mass education all around the world, we found that we didn't politically have the same resources, university by university, as were available in the old elite days. And moreover, with the rise of neoliberalism in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and fellow travelers elsewhere, it was decided that the value of a university education, in particular the present value, the net present value, was private, and that therefore university students should be paying for their education rather than the state paying them, because the benefit was private. And so instead of going straight into saying, right, pay now, which would reverse the progress from elite to mass education, students got loans, supplemented in some countries with grants, and in some countries university education is still free, but in many countries students have loans and they're expected to pay them back when their salary progresses beyond a certain range after they graduate. And the justification for that is that university education is seen by so many people in the neoliberal political parties as something that's essentially a private privilege for which the state and the taxpayer should not be paying. That went hand in hand with a reduction in the funding from the state to the universities. That in turn created greater and greater competition between the universities for enrollments. That competition itself gave rise to the university equivalent of league tables, credit ratings, rankings. That in turn gave rise to a mentality amongst rectors, presidents, and vice chancellors that became less and less like university vice chancellors of old, and more like present day chairpeople of soccer clubs, where the need was to score quickly and within 3 years. The competition was market-based, but the market was not level. The market was not perfect. Markets never actually have been. And in practice, what you had was state determination of what the market will be deciding, rather than leaving it fully to the market, even in the United States. So there was the rhetoric in neoliberalism of market forces with the reality of increased state control, and that state control was expressed through the medium of funding, some things being funded more than others. The other development that came with all of that was the transition of the student identity from being a pupil, or in the case of Oxford and Cambridge, which I knew in my youth, you were regarded as a patient who had to be cured of the disease of ignorance. Very Victorian 19th century. We are galaxies away from that these days. These days, the student is treated, up to a point, as a sovereign, and the particular kind of sovereign, the consumer sovereignty. And we have myriads of people in a university making sure that students aren't offended or upset or exposed to anything such as failing the exam. And they're given lots of chances to take it. And the academic faculty are expected and indeed required to fully adopt the model of the student as customer. And so the student is buying education, but the student is not yet evolved or mature enough to know what that actually is. So in business jargon, we're curing information asymmetry, but we're giving it to the less informed party to tell us what the cure actually is by the operation of consumer sovereignty. More recently, but before COVID, we have the rise of massive open online courses, and these were offered entirely free, and that introduced a new business model to universities from business corporations and business in general. And the business in general, the Gillette model, Gillette razor blades. You buy Gillette razor blades, but first of all, you buy the razor, which is very, very cheap. But then you've got to keep buying razor blades, and they're very, very expensive. So MOOCs, the course is cheap, indeed free, but then you want a credential, then you want a certificate, and that is expensive. And if you want a certificate that involves passing an exam, that's even more expensive. So the MOOC providers are operating in the opposite, under opposite pressure to conventional universities. Conventional universities under great pressure to pass as many students as possible and to retain them. MOOCs rather the opposite, because their business model is the Gillette razor blade. In the last 2 decades, since China modernized, Western universities have been fishing in the Chinese waters to get international students. And one of the initial, and in fact, perhaps arguably the major effect of COVID on such universities is drying up of the Chinese market now, which was probably going to happen in the next 10 years anyway, with devastating effects on university short-term finances and lots of losses of jobs, especially in places like Australia, and big cutbacks in the casual labour force as well. So in response to that, the universities that don't already have links with rich alumni many of the ones in the United States do, most of the ones in most of the rest of the world don't, are starting to study what the United States universities have done to court tycoons to endow premises, courses, machines, medical units, etc. And that means that programs like Dragon's Den in the UK or Shark Tank in Australia, and I'm sure South Africa is going to have something fairly similar, where people come along and pitch ideas and rich tycoons say yes or no on a relatively standard checklist of whether the business looks like it could get off the ground and sell. That's kind of the thing that is a first reaction to COVID by universities. A second reaction is what I call STEMinism. I don't mean any disrespect to feminism, even though they sound the same, but STEMinism is the idea that the salvation in the immediate future for universities hit by COVID and having numbers is to specialize in S for science, T for technology, E for engineering, and M for maths, because that's where the jobs are. In the old days of elite education, you did arts, humanities, and social science because you were going to be a leader. And so, like the mandarins in old China, you needed a general liberal education and to understand human nature. Whereas in the modern university that prepares people for working for other people, you don't need that at all. In fact, probably the less you know about human nature, the better. Just do what you're told and be an expert. So that's why I call it STEMinism instead of something that tokens admiration, because I think it's a very sinister move. Effectively, it's saying science and its closely related disciplines are the things really worth studying because that gets you jobs. And we were wasting the last 1,000 years looking at humanities and social sciences. And it'd be some time before that tips back the other way. The other big reaction in COVID has been that universities that were primarily face-to-face suddenly discovered online education. That's perfectly natural and reasonable. But what's unreasonable is to think that online education is cheaper, that will get you more students. And from my personal experience of doing online for the last 15 years, having done conventional face-to-face before, online students, if they're any good, are much more demanding than face-to-face. With a big class face-to-face, or even a medium-sized one, the kids don't really want to be picked on. They just want to sit there and absorb. But with online education, especially when they're not on campus at all and not having any sort of campus-type social life, they really want individual attention. They want you responding straight away and with taking their particular personality and circumstances well into account. And since we all get appraised on our feedback, you better take that seriously.
Gabriel,
future-proofing the university. I think the university that will survive longest, three main things. First, elections happen in business corporations. They used to happen in elite universities. We ought to put them back in regular universities to improve the morale of the staff and stop pretending that we're running Captain Bligh's Mutiny on the Bounty kind of ship when we're running a university. Next thing, we've got to realize that online education is, if it's of any quality, as labor intensive as good old face-to-face was, and invest in people. And then lastly, we have got to be flexible and clever, even laterally thinking about the kinds of alliances that our various universities make in order to survive in the reduced but still very highly competitive world. Of course, I elaborate all these points in the chapter in the original book and the COVID book, but that's my 12 minutes. If there are any questions, of course, I'll be happy to talk to them.
Gabriel, thank you so much. colleagues questions. You may post questions in the chat. So you may ask your questions. Peter?
Yeah, just to say thanks very much. And thanks for coming in at such a late time in your day to share your thoughts, Gabriel. Just found it very interesting what you're saying about valuing staff, because there seems to be a pressure from students and from perhaps the senior management in universities that squeezes staff from two sides, and as you say, makes perhaps for Captain Bligh scenarios. And you said that I just wanted to clarify how you would suggest that universities value staff in such a way and invest in people in the staff sense in such a way that delivers a good survival model, if you want to call it that, for universities when the finances may be so tight for many.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I'm president of our teachers union branch, so and I was once a DVC in charge of HR, so I've looked at that from both sides now, in the words of the popular song. And I think what a critical ingredient is, whether the university is rich or poor, is to have heads of school and deans elected. Elected maybe Chinese or Russian style, with an approved list, properly qualified in the normal sorts of sense, but that would be the single biggest thing to make staff feel that they were valued and participating, and that they weren't at the mercy of some untrained dictator that was trying to please his or her own bosses with only the vaguest idea of what it was involved in doing that.
Martin, hi, your hand is up.
Yeah, I flinch slightly when I hear about students as customers, because when I'm a customer in my local supermarket, my local branch of Sainsbury's, I'm conscious that sometimes they need to make a robust decision as to which customer is right whenever, and I can see that with students, we sometimes need to make a robust decision. If I have a student coming to me saying that they want to pass the exam nevertheless, or saying they've had really difficult conditions, I need to make some robust decisions. And yet I have students, particularly in the COVID environment, who have incredibly difficult circumstances, which we're not even set up to deal with. And I just wanted to ask, Gabriel, how do you think we resolve that? How do you think we don't go all out, the customer is always right, but how do we make sure that we do have our students' interests at heart?
A lot depends who we actually turns out to be. Because if I'm going to generalize about everybody and all the different stakeholders in the university, I'll say that we do that by actually caring. I think when an academic or a bureaucrat or a head of department stops caring, it's very obvious and they should change careers. But realistically speaking, individual attention and maintaining quality, so that if somebody's in dire straits, they're helped to repeat the course rather than given a pass when they should be failing. If you think of a subject like nursing or medicine, it's self-evident why that's the way to do it.
Thank you.
Okay, we have the opportunity for one last question. Gabriel, what do you think is the middle ground? What is the golden formula here, if that exists? How do we find the middle ground?
Middle between which two extremes?
Well,
several possible dimensions that you could be talking in here. Which one are you particularly talking in? Political right and left, or what?
I'm talking about the student customer.
Ah, right. Like most unnecessarily polarized relationships, the middle ground is making a good relationship by like what we usually do with new PhD students, we kind of negotiate a contract. How often are we going to see each other? When are you going to do milestones? That kind of a thing. In other words, the approach in the middle ground would be kind of contractual, but not in the box ticking or suing at any sense, but just that we don't go in not knowing what to expect. We discuss at the beginning what our mutual expectations might be. And I think this works just as well with undergrads. Obviously online, you have to do it by doing general announcements and then having tutorials where you actually speak to each other, as well as being responsive to emails to finesse things for the individuals with their vastly different family and other responsibilities.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gabriel. Colleagues, we've come to the end of Gabriel's chat. We will now move on to Dima Diop. She's an associate professor at Tristan University in Syria. She is actively involved with educational technology, and she has deep experience in that. So colleagues, she will start her presentation. If you'll have any questions, please put it in the chat and I will relay to her. Dima, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello everyone. Just checking that the sound is okay. So can you hear me?
Sound is perfect.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Dima Diop and I'm an associate professor of educational technology in Tishrin University in Syria. So I have prepared some slides about the Syrian experience, how Syria reacted to COVID-19 and is still reacting. So I'd like to share some of these slides very quickly with you. Just a minute. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to the Syrian higher education system. Syria is an Arab country on the Eastern Mediterranean, and we actually have 6 state universities, we have 22 private universities, and we also have 1 completely virtual university, which is the Syrian Virtual University that was established in 2002. Now, like everyone else, we've been, COVID-19 impacted Syrian higher education system, and we had a lockdown period from the 14th of March to the 23rd of May, 2020. This has resulted in the disruption of over 650,000 university Syrian students. Now, what makes the impact of COVID-19 unique in the Syrian experience is that Syrian universities were already trying to rise from a 10-year crisis that had actually undermined a lot of its physical infrastructure and also human power or human cornerstones in Syria. Now, what COVID-19 did was really it was a call to revisit the rationale for blended learning or online learning. Previously, we had only 1 virtual university, which is a fully fledged online university. And it provided online learning to what I call immobilized minority. What I mean by immobilized minority is, those people who had busy lifestyles, they had families, so it enabled them from access to learning or higher education. It allows them to continue their studies. Other categories were immobilized by geographical distance, especially since the dislocation of many Syrian students and their families. So it was a way to include them actually. And It also enabled students who lost their institutions to the war to have access to higher education as well. So this was the rationale for online learning before the outbreak of COVID-19. With the outbreak of COVID-19, this rationale has been expanded to actually include the masses. So I would call it like a move from including immobilized minority in Syria to including the immobilized masses. Students like came to universities and students came to a complete stop from learning, and like new solutions had to come like then. Now I'm just going to talk about the reaction, which I call it an initial reaction to COVID-19 in the Syrian context. We had two reactions actually. First one is immediate or emergency response, and we had also a longer term response. Now, on the immediate level, there was a type of recycling of tools. We had absolutely no culture of distance learning except for the Syrian Virtual University, which is the first online university in the Middle East. So the first proposal was to use or to recycle the tools of the Syrian Virtual University. And it had actually an integrated virtual environment. One of these tools, it was a live class. It uses web demo, so students can meet their teachers, they can ask questions. The whole session is recorded, and then they can view it again. It had a Moodle environment. It had an online assessment environment as well. Okay, so this was the first initiative. So it was, sorry, can you still see the screen? I'm not sure if it's still.
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
Okay, all right, thank you. Now, what made this initiative hard to implement is the technical requirements. So only the Syrian Virtual University students had academic accounts. All the 650,000 students that were disrupted had no virtual academic accounts at all. We had no distance learning culture before that. We also had the digital divide in its multiple senses. So firstly, we have skills divide. So some students were actually more skilled than their teachers. So we had some students who are digital natives, teachers who are what I would call digital migrants or even aliens sometimes that really never used computers or anything. We had problems with the digital divide in terms of access. So some students had broadband connection, which is very fast, and some students and staff had only prepaid connections, which would have financial implications on them. We also had motivational access. So some professors were IT professors who found it easier for them to create their material online, while students actually, so all of these types of problems, in addition to the inadequate technological and human infrastructure, there was absolutely no training. Web demo requires a set of programs, and not everybody could download them or play them, and it needed a lot of practice. So the first initiative, which is using existing tools, which are very sophisticated, did not really work because of all of these reasons. The other initiative, it was actually similar, but it was recycling generic tools that we have. So teachers and students are used to WhatsApp, YouTube. So what really characterized this initial period of response, that it was diverse initiatives. It was fragmented initiative. So every teacher used whatever applications they are used to. Some of them used WhatsApp, some of them used Facebook groups so these are applications that are usually designed for communication purposes. Students found it hard to trust these applications for pedagogical purposes. Some other university lecturers used YouTube and live streaming, but all of this was a change in content delivery. There was no adequate interaction between staff and students. We also had another problem, which is the cultural and registration expectations. As I said before, the concept of virtual or distance learning is foreign, and sometimes I would dare to say it like it is inferior, because students who do not grade enough to enter state universities which are completely free, they go for online learning, which is cheaper and it requires like less grades. So the concept of virtual education was not part of their expectations upon registration. There is no offering like of distance learning from the start. So students who register, they expect actually to have like social life fully lived and whatever. So all of these factors, in addition to actually describing this period as a learning gap, like many students thought, okay, so we have a learning gap. Even the ministry sometimes referred to it like learning gap and compensation for the learning gap after the break. So all of these factors actually triggered the waiting mode. Students felt in the initial stages of COVID-19, these 2 months that they are waiting, they are like just on, like their study is on hold, and whatever they had of courses, it had to be repeated again face to face. Now, the second, COVID-19, which is a little bit later, I just want to say that the initial response to COVID-19 also achieved gains. And the gains were the following. Firstly, we had digitalization of content. Many students could not actually attend university because of transportation costs and expenses. They could not attend university because they live in far places. So they relied for their lecture notes on their colleagues or on businesses that sell them actually the lecture notes sometimes, and they are not very professional. Now, faculties required from all staff to put their whatever like modules they are teaching on a CD and to give it to faculty managers to distribute to students. So that was a plus for students. Now they have access to like open source free faculty generated materials that are very reliable. They do not have to pay for it. So content was digitalized in a sense, and that helped students a lot. The other gain we had from the first phase of like responding to COVID-19 was restructuring class sizes and dynamics. In some departments, we have like 1,000 students attending lectures, and this was a lot of burden like on everybody. No interaction, little time for speaking and interaction, and so on. So universities asked like staff to divide classes into smaller classes. This was demanding in terms of tutor labor, but it was very beneficial for students because they had quality time with tutors. Now, sorry. Yes, I have a couple of minutes. Now, so the final gain was institutionalized adoption of the concept of blended learning. Now, I'm just going to talk in 2 slides about the final phase of response, which is the more recent phase of response to COVID-19. And I can sum it up like in 1 sentence, which is the move from spontaneity to sustainability. So we learned lessons in the first phase, and the second phase was actually actual implementation. So Tishrin University has launched a Moodle environment to blend 2 types of learning, which is online and offline. So in case of emergency, we'll be completely ready, not just like acting on the spur of the moment. And it provided a training to staff, like 106 of them, and that's in December 2020, and to students as well. So this picture is taken from the actual training we had as staff, and I participated in it as well, the use of Moodle tools for delivery of online content. Now, in the final slide, I just want to talk about the vision. Now, we learned a lot of lessons. Now we are in a more advanced stage of response to COVID-19. Now, what we need to consider in the future is the move from a reactive response like to a proactive response. So we have everything ready in case of emergency, not just COVID-19, but any other emergency or crisis. We need to think of higher education, not in terms of continuity, but in terms of quality. And for this to happen, we need to move from delivery of content. Okay, we digitalized content, but we need to redesign experience because students are fine with transforming content and make it digital, but they are actually more concerned about assessment and about the reform of curricula and reform of assessment methods. And this is something to consider and include in the next stages of response. So really what I want to finish my presentation with is saying that blended learning is not actually a trend. It has become like a post-pandemic basic literacy. And like I said, it's blended because we cannot afford technologically or like in any other sense having totally virtual, like online tuition. So this is it from me. Thank you so much for listening and for giving me this opportunity. If you have any questions, please just let me know.
Dima, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay.
You may stop sharing your screen. Colleagues,
Okay,
questions?
great.
Peter, your hand is up.
Yeah, sure. Just to say thanks, Dima, for your
Thank you.
presentation. I'm interested in the blended learning side of what you were saying, with the online smaller groups seeming to work in what you were saying, but the need for blended is the face-to-face as well, to encourage a better experience, possibly with the social life,
Absolutely,
etc.
yes.
of those things. I just wondered if you thought that through a bit further as to actually how it would look. Some of these universities, I'm just wondering how many we're talking about, but I'm trying to work out how much would be face-to-face and how much online and how it would be chunked across a year. How, you know, just to design.
Yes, absolutely. We are still in the stage of training at the moment, but actually many departments took the initiative of putting some theoretical modules online. And there are some competencies or skills that cannot actually be taught online. Like for medical students, they have to attend like in hospitals, and for engineers, there are some practical skills, some competencies that cannot be. So really, the best way forward is to move theoretical content that needs self-paced like reading and reflection online, and to leave the practical skills to like face-to-face meetings. And they're absolutely necessary, especially in our context. Really, students get very motivated when they see and interact with their like tutors face-to-face. They are not used to online learning, but they have started to accept it. I don't know how much should be put online, but we are still in the trial period. But I think, like I said, just what requires reflection and reading, and maybe leave like the interactions like part to. I just want to add one thing, that the ministry actually asked like tutors to have office hours as an extension to lecture time. So they said, okay, cut down on lecture time and have office hours to have one-to-one meetings with students as well. Thank you for your question. Okay.
Thank you.
Victor?
Thank you.
Victor, your hand is up.
Can I just read one final question? Like someone is asking what devices or IT was the staff equipped with in this time to assist with blended learning? Like I said, it was very sporadic effort. Everybody used what they are like comfortable with. But at the moment, all university laboratories are equipped with computers, and the Moodle environment has gone on the university's website. Staff and students have login credentials so they can use this environment online. It doesn't require a lot of like IT infrastructure, and this is why Moodle is like an ideal solution, because it does not require a lot of programs or a lot of fast connection. It is also asynchronous, so it's not at the same time. So this might help initially. Okay.
Okay, can I?
Thank you so much. Yes.
Yes, go,
Yes,
Victor.
please.
Okay, thank you very much for this excellent presentation. My name is Victor. I am following from South Africa. You know, I regard Syria maybe probably as a middle-income country like South Africa. And from our side, the transition from face-to-face teaching and learning to remote learning has faced quite a number of challenges. And one of the challenges in South Africa is students' lack of access to the internet and data. And as universities, we've gone that long way to provide students with data. I wanted to find out from the presenter, how have they dealt with this issue of lack of access to internet and lack of access to data? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, now like the ministry, all universities are like, okay, are administered like by the ministry, and the ministry is providing cheaper internet access for students and some prepaid internet access for students. And we have support, like we have IT support in every single faculty as well. But in terms of expenses, they are trying to provide cheaper access for staff and for students, and sometimes free access. It depends. Not always. They cannot apply this to everybody, but they are trying to make things a little bit easier. We're still in the initial phases of this. So thank you so much for listening and for your questions. Thank you so much.
Ima, thank you so much. Okay, we'll move on to the next speaker. So we just have a minute to change, a few seconds to change over if you're going over to the next session. So in the meantime, Moketsi, can you get your presentation ready?
May I have the Zoom chili?
Yeah, give me a second, Prof. Give me a second. I just want to introduce you. So Professor Moketsi Lekatsa is a professor of philosophy at the University of South Africa. He is the UNESCO chair of ODL at the university, which is Open Distance Learning. Professor, the floor is yours. Please go into presentation mode and start your presentation.
Shireen, I'm trying to share the screen.
You have the screen shared, but you need to go into presentation mode.
Oh, okay. I have no idea.
Right at the bottom where the plus and minus sign is, go to your, at the bottom where the plus and minus sign is, you'll see the little arrow that shows, the little icon that shows present.
Okay. All right. In the meantime, while I'm doing this, I'm so spoiled. I normally have my secretary with me here, who always does this thing. So if I don't do that, I get bogged down. That's a problem of age. I'm about to retire, so it doesn't matter. I can't share it, but I'll continue. I don't want to waste time. I wanted to start by thinking this opportunity and to say what I wanted to start with first was simply to express horror at the COVID. I think we are seeing a pandemic that is ravaging the country. I was just looking at the statistic this morning, and I've not been so horrified. I mean, in South Africa, we are sitting at 1.4 million infections. We have over 43,000 deaths. Worldwide, it's a nightmare. The United States is 26 million infections, 450 deaths. And the same thing goes Britain, Brazil, everywhere. And I try to compare what's happening between the world and South Africa. I mean, with well over 2.2 million runs and 45,000 deaths in South Africa, this pandemic is harrowing. What I find frustrating, though, is that we tend to be fed with the numbers. We don't actually get to see what happened, what actually happens on the ground. What I wanted to share with you here was basically the images. For example, the images in Los Angeles, the images in New York, the images in London, the images in Paris of the medics actually struggling with them, with the patients managing the COVID. When you look at those pictures, then you begin to see the realities of what COVID is doing. And for me, that's something that the media that feeds us with information on COVID misses. We get numbers, so many dead, but we don't actually get to see what's happening there. I belong to UNESCO because I work with, I hold the UNESCO chair. So the information that I have comes from the work that we do as members of the UNESCO fraternity. Our Director General, Ms. Audrey Azoulay, came out in March and simply sensitized us to the dangers of COVID, to say at the time of the outbreak, the danger we faced as educators was that there was over 1.6 billion learners worldwide that were affected by the school closures due to COVID. That's massive. What that did, I think it then brought into our face the real gravity and the magnitude of what we are facing. What happens in a world where in excess of 1 billion children or learners, even across university, are out of school? The assumptions is that we are going to close. The dangers of COVID were that we have to respect social distancing, we can't congregate, therefore we have to move the learners home. And that's exactly what happened. So we sent people home, we closed in South Africa, we saw massive closures of universities. But the question is, were we prepared for what comes after? When we send learners or students home, the assumption is that we'll find ways of mitigating this risk. And this has come out in the previous presenters. The only route now is to say, we'll all go online. And of course, what we are doing right now, we are really demonstrating exactly that. I do a lot of presentations globally, and I speak with students who are logged onto either Zoom or Microsoft Teams or GoToMeeting, or you name it. There is a whole variety of platforms around that are provided by the IT companies that we can move into. My former boss at UNISA, who is now the Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, Professor Phakeng, came out and said she actually runs one of the best universities, I think, in Africa. The University of Cape Town ranks as the top university in Africa. And she made a very bold statement that the only way we can deal with the challenges of COVID-19 is that we need to recognize that improved distance learning will be the key, particularly when the second wave hits. Every country thought we are dealing with the first impact, but when the second wave hit, then there were massive problems. So Professor Phakeng was, in my view, one of the first people to really endorse that. But in South Africa, we at UNISA, and Prof. Shireen here is my colleague, he knows, we are, I think, the oldest university in Africa with over 140, close to 150 years, and we have been doing distance. In the UK, most of you will know what the Open University does. In India, the Indira Gandhi Open University. These are some of the key. In the United States, I think it's Phoenix in Arizona. You do have these institutions that already had the learning management system infrastructure to allow them to go online, or that have been doing online. What about the rest of the universities? I mean, most of our contact universities were caught completely hands off. I mean, they didn't have the infrastructure, they struggle. And so if you look at the institutions, particularly in South Africa, we have what we call the prestigious universities. They are normally referred to as the Big Five. I don't have to name them. UCT, University of Cape Town, University of KwaZulu-Natal, University of Pretoria, Stellenbosch, I think the University of Pretoria. These are the Ivy League universities, but they did not have the infrastructure. They were not prepared for the onset of open distance learning. How do we then mediate that challenge? And that's the major challenge. But at UNISA, as I just said, UNISA and the rest of the distance learning institutions, by virtue of the simple fact that they already had the infrastructure, the expectations were that they would probably roll out. But we also had our own challenges. At UNISA, I'm glad to say that experience showed, I think we are one of the first institutions, Prof. Shireen will correct me there. Last year, we ran our exams online. I mean, we are an institution in excess with students enrollment in excess of 400,000. You can imagine, but I think it's evidence of the fact that the experience that UNISA has been doing online learning for many years basically is an epitome to that. What is happening at the UNESCO? I'm sure some of you are wondering. You're talking about, the virus. You're talking about UNISA. What about the center that I chair? I run the UNESCO chair here on open distance learning. My mandate, which is what UNESCO gave me, was first to build capacity in ODL, but second, to be, for the UNESCO chair to be a portal, a think tank, a place where people can come in and engage, and a center that should then galvanize research and motivate and inspire people to go distance. And what we did at the UNESCO chair is we before the outbreak of COVID, we were running, context seminars. We normally plan 10 research seminars a year, and in between we get our own ODL conference. We also spread some workshops where we target young and emerging scholars. Before the outbreak, this was okay. We were doing all these things in context. We go to seminars, we book venues, but you know what happened? COVID basically says, this is now a no can do. We cannot do that. So we had to come back and ask ourselves, how do we move forward? I'm very blessed that my admin team is a team of 2 young women, millennials. The oldest is 32, the youngest is 23. And these are young people who sit with me and basically guide me with the technology. And they simply say to me, Prof, we can do these programs, we can go online. Let's see how we can utilize UNISA's online portal, Microsoft Teams, to see if we can get our sessions going. And I said to them, go ahead and do the exploration. They did, and they came back and pitched an idea. I looked at it and I went, wow, these kids are amazing. And we rolled out the seminars. Normally we get invitations. We have, throughout the year, we have 10 people that come in. We rule out January, we rule out December. So we are talking from February to November. So we have 10 sessions a year. In 2020, we had 10 very successful seminars that we did, including our inaugural conference, where we had Professor Tony, I forget his name, but he's from Vancouver. He's the head of Contact North, who gave a keynote address. 2020, we couldn't do it, but we had to go virtual. And I'm glad to tell you that we started the virtual seminars. We went online, and as a head of the unit, I was blown away. Most of our seminars had no less than 80 people logged on to the Microsoft team, basically engaging. Professor Paul Prinsloo, one of our key professors in open distance learning, broke the record. In his session. There were 110 people that logged on. So that's what it is. We rolled out our conference, but last year we couldn't. This year, I'm working with the Vice Principal Research. We are planning, I'm leading a team that is going to be running the joint conference between the UNESCO chair and the Research and Innovation Directorate. We are already working on the e-conference that's going to take place in August. We are building on events like this. In November, the UNESCO chair, jointly with the International Association of Mobile Learning in Concordia, University of Chicago, we also rolled out a conference, and I took all those lessons to say this things can be done. So we are moving forward. The assumptions here is that things can be done in a time of crisis if we go online. However, there's a catch to that. In South Africa, we have a bigger problem, a huge problem. We are supposed to be an upper middle income African country, but one of the things that marks South Africa is that South Africa is a country that is fraught with massive inequalities. In 2019, one of the statistics think tanks here, Statistics South Africa, released a report titled Inequality Trends in South Africa. It's a sobering report. It's a report that basically shows that South Africa continues on the downward spiral, where the rich are becoming richer and they're becoming smaller. The majority of people who are mostly African, they're becoming poorer, and they constitute largely over 80% of the population. So the inequalities are huge, they are frightening, and they raise serious questions when it comes to how do we manage the challenges that are brought to COVID. I mean, you have lots and lots of people who live in informal settlement in shacks, and you have people who live in mansions, and it's that kind of lifestyle. And I'm not saying this is peculiar to South Africa. I've flown into Rio, I've seen massive slums, and then you see opulence. It's there, it's always, whether you are in the first world, you still see this inequality.
Do you have a minute more?
Yes, I'm aware of that. And so this is what we're doing in South Africa. We are rolling out that, but I wanted to close by saying that and I heard that Prof. Delaney spoke very delightedly about the importance of online learning. The point is that in COVID, our challenges are that we need to be creative. We need to pull out online learning. But online learning is neither open nor accessible. It's only for those that have. In South Africa, for example, there are few people that can afford the laptops, the tablets, or access to the internet. The majority of people who live in informal settlements, in the township, in the poor, can't. Victor alluded to that in his question, but he spoke mainly about lack of access to data. I think the problem is more than that. It's lack of access to the basic facility that allow access to online learning possible, because in times of COVID where we can't go to school, yes, the logic prevails, online learning should be the solution. But if we can't deal with this inequality where we make online learning accessible, then we are in a different point. I want to close with just a pearl of wisdom. I have so much admiration to the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung. He wrote in the Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche that the serious problems in life, however, are never fully solved. If ever they should appear to be so, it is a sure sign that something has been lost. The meaning and purpose of a problem seem to lie not in its solution, but in our working at it incessantly. This alone preserves us from stultification and petrification. I'll close with that. Thank you.
Professor, thank you. Colleagues, questions? Prof, you may stop sharing your screen. So I'll kick off the first question. I mean, Professor, you've got to unmute yourself. The first question is, you're speaking about the digital divide.
Yes.
I mean, it is getting increasingly worse, but I think there's something greater than the digital divide going on. There's a whole social divide in in basically the BRICS countries. And we're increasingly seeing that happening in the more developed countries as well. How are we as academics in this space here going to find some type of reasonable approach of dealing with this issue? Clearly, we cannot provide education for all.
Yeah. In 2017, I was invited to give a keynote address at the Namibian College of Online Learning. It was a graduation, and part of my presentation, and it's something that I've been selling. I now serve in one of the advisory committees in the National Commission of in the Department of Science and Technology and Education. Part of the argument that I push forward is that I know many of you here would not even entertain the idea of me making reference to the teachings of Karl Marx, but I'm tempted to say that, Karl Marx's teaching was basically that society is fraught with inequalities. It's not something that can be resolved overnight. You always have the haves and you always have the have-nots, and that has always been the trend. And we can argue about some governments being efficient and some governments being inefficient, but the bottom line is that society will always be stratified. And then my argument has always been that as academics, we need to be very creative. One of the things that I advance in my argument about the digital divide is that we probably might not be able to uplift extremely poor communities or individuals. We can only do that if we improve governance and if we ensure that those basic services that we lament in South Africa, water, lighting, sanitation, then they become services that are available to majority, irrespective of whether we are rich and poor. But beyond that, I always think that as academics and as particularly as universities, it's important that we look into how do we make the very same issues that we are complaining about, data, hardware, how do we make them available? My argument is the cellular companies across the world are raking billions and billions in profits. And we sit back, we look at them, it's the new norm. I think we need to look at the cellular companies, and this is where the Director General of UNESCO did. When she launched the Global Education Consortium, what she did was to approach Orange, Vodafone, MTN and say to them, you need to do something. commit your corporate social responsibility, a piece of your profit, so that you can make a difference in society. And what she did was amazing. She has been able to pull the support from these cellular companies to spread all those data, phones and tablets to most of the countries throughout Africa. If we were to do that in South Africa, if we were to hold Vodacom, if we were to hold MTN, if we were to hold Cell C, we hold them and say, look, you cannot just go on making money. What is your gift to society? Give us a percentage of your corporate social responsibility. Let's see that include, for example, build cellular towers all over where access is not the internet. Then provide what you call I don't know, compute centers, so that wherever you are, the whole place will be, as it were, Wi-Fi sensitive. That way, and then make sure that data is easily accessible. These guys are listed on the stock exchange. They don't plead poverty. We sit here, we fold our arms. I think we need to hold cellular companies to the responsibility of social corporate responsibility. We need to be hard on that. We need to put proposals. We need to go to parliament. We need to make noises. We need to shame and name them. We need to make sure that they are stinking rich and they are very greedy and they are not doing anything to change society. I'm very strong when it comes to that.
Okay, thanks, Prof. There's a question in the chat. It says, hi, Prof. What is UNISA's experience in retention of staff and students versus Udemy and similar platforms that allow instructors to build online courses on their preferred topics for the world?
I mean, and again, thanks to Professor Pagain, she's now at UCT, but when she was at UNISA, she was the vice principal of research. And what she did was she rolled out massive, I think she changed the face of incentive and retention through multiple programs that we did. UNISA now boasts of a whole range of funded programs that support staff to stay, to retain. Here is one. You do a PhD, you are a member of staff, you're doing a PhD, you go on a program called AKIP. I don't know, Prof. Singh, you can tell me what AKIP is, but I know it's a program that allows a member of staff to simply relinquish responsibility. You don't teach, you don't do administration, you go home, you sit in your home, you focus on a PhD. The university then appoints a substitute for you so that even though you are in a distance environment, you can stay at home and you get all your salary is there, you have access to all the resources, you finish your PhD. That's support. When young people complete, we have what we call vision keepers. We provide funding for them to go to institutions of their choice where they can spend time with mentors and learn. I mean, here we have lots and lots of funding programs that allow staff to, I mean, when young people finish their PhDs, at UNISA, my wife and I did our PhDs at UNISA. You are not going to believe, I think we paid less than 10,000 rand between the two of us. Just less than 10,000 rand. Now, let me say this. When you're outside UNISA, you're doing a PhD as a UNISA student, you'll pay 14,000 rands a year. No, we paid for only one module. And the two of us completed PhDs at UNISA. I mean, who could leave an institution like that? This institution basically rolls out. I mean, now I've just been told that I don't even have a choice of retiring. I've just started the chair. I'll probably get my second term up until 2025. I'll be 69 and 70, but I've been told, Professor Makanya told me in no uncertain terms, you don't retire, and that's the key. The key is to say when people are, someone spoke about the aging professorate. I don't buy that. UNISA does not allow people to retire. You retire at your own choice. You do not have to. Someone my age should be allowed to stay here and do that critical scholastic mandate and responsibility, knowledge transfer. My job now is to mentor. I have a whole team of young people that have just completed their PhDs, and my responsibility is to groom them. Right now, it's January, February. Professor Singh, you know, we are now submitting papers to be captured that are going to be sent so that the university can get subsidy. My chair is giving my college, I think, over 15. We are looking at 20 public. That's my job. And UNISA basically gives me that space. This is the only university that allows me to feel like I'm in control of my destiny. Professor Makanya called me an entrepreneurial professor, and I'm proud to say that.
Professor, thank you so much. Thank you. We'll move on to the next talk, and that is on the examination issues. Colleagues, you know, the university has been long recognized as the pinnacle of education. You know, people come through the system, they would go through the different levels, and then they would get a PhD if they are so inclined. The internet has changed that. Increasingly, our students are looking for some type of comfort within the on the internet. Where with COVID and the revitalization of universities, and universities have started investing a little more in technology, increasingly we have asked our students to go online. This has resulted in something what is referred to as digital scholarship. Now, within this digital scholarship area, we've got the undergraduate students who are involved, and the postgraduate students. So this secretive culture of the university has now changed. So let's look at this in context. Right? We basically have two types of universities. One is the residential university, and the other is the distance education university. With COVID, all universities have gone online, and all students and all key stakeholders have been thrown into that space. And I argue that basically everybody, willing or not, has become digital scholars. This has introduced a whole new set of issues that we previously never thought about. Now let's reflect on the ritual, and I call it the ritual of examinations or assessments. You know, the first examination was, but firstly, the examinations are the bedrock of the education system. So the first recognized examination came from the Imperial Chinese examination system. And on that system, people who are entering the government sector or the civil service would have to write an exam. And those exams were really tough exams, to such an extent that over a period of time, people started collecting successful essays and selling them off. And there were really particular problems with the system, you know, such as people began to anticipate questions. People were cheating in the form of cribbing, the impersonation, sending somebody else to write the examination, substituting the exam paper, and bribery. This sounds familiar. We are aware of these issues, right? So to deal with these practices, what did the Chinese do? They introduced frisking, right, from head to toe. Our equivalent is that we use signal jamming, and we don't let students carry anything into the examination. Constant patrolling. Modern day equivalent, we have invigilation by human beings walking around and watching what's going on. Then we have anonymity of examiners. We have the second examiner or the moderator who re-looks at the script. Or in those days, they would reproduce the essay, so nobody could recognize the handwriting. Modern day equivalent is that we have really sophisticated MCQ style questions, you know, that we use as a deterrent. Then we have the re-examination of successful essays. We have moderation and external examiners. And the Chinese really took this seriously. They had execution. So if you were caught cheating, you were executed. Modern day equivalent of that is trial by social media. Now in the Western world, the first universities that actually introduced examinations were the universities of Paris and the University of Bologna. Now, mind you, at that time, nobody really failed an examination. It was very rare that somebody would fail. But those systems experienced the same problems that the Chinese system experienced. So what have we tried to do? Much like our predecessors, we have tried to develop something called authentic examinations, right? And we've introduced portfolio assessments, overall tests, assessment, self-assessments, peer assessments, you know, co-assessments. All this has done is that we have created sophisticated, labor-intensive examination tools. We really have not solved the problems that both the Chinese and the European system experienced. Now, there are compelling arguments as to why we must have examinations, right? One argument is that the candidate who is being examined, you know, reaches a particular level and says they've mastered that material. The next perspective is that the academics can be measured, that they have managed to take so many people through the system. And finally, from the university's perspective, it's a convenient way of moving the candidate to the next level and to claim some type of subsidy. And finally, from the external stakeholders' perspective, I mean, you have some sense of trust that the person that has been produced, be it a doctor, lawyer, accountant, understands their particular field, and I'm confident enough to allow them to work with me or to doctor me or to look at my finances. Now, within the university space, it is really frowned upon if you cheat. It is really, really frowned upon. I mean, and I suppose this view is probably because of the moral imperative that thou shalt not steal or thou shalt not bear false witness. Now, we must put this in context. Most of our modern day universities have, when they started off with really strong links to the church. So this moral imperative that thou shalt not cheat or bear false witness has actually carried forward into our modern day university spaces. Now, I come from the information system space or the computing space, and those lines have been really quite blurred. We encourage people to have data repositories where you can go and find programs that have already been written, and you copy, cut, and paste it into your artifact or tool with very little to no reference to where you got the material from. We've got the whole open access movement that is arguing that we should lift bans and allow people to use material, right? There's this blurring of attitudes towards originality. So the question is, why not cheat? Now let's reflect on examinations. All right. So in the good old days, we banned mobile phones. We had pre-seating arrangements. We ensured there was a reasonable distance between people. And in some really bizarre circumstances, as you can see here, really bizarre circumstances, people were stripped down of their clothes and were taking exams in an open field. Now, these are a group of recruits for the Indian Army. They've been stripped down, put down into a field, and an examination is proceeding. All right? Another set of really what I would see as rather inhumane approaches that are being used is that students have these paper hats on their head to avoid them from turning around and looking at what other people are doing. And sometimes even before the examination starts, and for those people who are looking very carefully, they will see my university's name mentioned in there. People register at the university and they immediately get emails or WhatsApp saying that, hey, we can help you pass the examination. Now that we moved over into the online space, right, or more into the online space, the questions have been asked. How do we really stop people from being involved in nefarious activities, right? And now we are looking at incorporating tools like Turnitin and proctoring tools into the examination journey. However, I argue that we are not really fundamentally changing anything. We are just taking old technologies and re-implementing them in a more sophisticated way. For example, proctoring. We're getting people, previously people stood in a venue, walked around and watched what people were doing. Now what we're doing, we've got technology doing it. So it is just old technology being reused in a more sophisticated way. So now the issues are that, universities are trust systems and people trust that what we are doing. If candidates cheat in their examinations or at any stage during the process, at some point in time, they will be caught out. The next issue is that, for example, universities are and people have raised this issue during previous talks, is that what type of support have we given our students? Have we given them data? I'm arguing that some universities have given this support to students, but students do not know how to fully maximize and use that support. So it's one thing giving them the support, but how are students realizing and using that support? The next issue is that our university is the university bureaucracy robust enough to allow the academics to do things extremely differently? Which begs the next question: if academics are knowledge workers, why should they come into the campus? Why? And how should we manage the time of academics? And an interesting thing that is happening with this, with the whole, COVID lockdown, is that communication channels has fundamentally changed. Previously, the students would write to the academics, or would write to the lecturer concerned, or probably the COD or the dean. Now what we have is catapult communication. The students write immediately to the principal or the VP of the university prior to the dean or the actual academics knowing what's going on. And all of a sudden decisions are made and communications are happening without the core stakeholders, which are academics, being involved in this. So that's changed the way we communicate. The next issue is that in traditional examinations, the students sat in the venue, wrote the exam, we took the exam papers away from them. With online exams, students, really sophisticated, take their cell phones, take pictures of the exam paper, of the electronic exam paper, critique it, and then put it on social media and say, look, can you see these academics or these university folk do not know how to do A, B, and C. And it's increasingly happening. And finally, universities have this long history of really working independently of each other, so independently of each other that we compete for the same resources. We compete for the same students, we compete for the same funding, we compete for the same grants. I mean, why is it that we do not have or start developing some type of institutional university repository where we actually can do examinations from there? And we have people saying that, you know what, I'll submit the following types of questions, and we start developing these type of repositories. What is clear to me that technology is going to play an increasingly important role in how we move forward in the university journey, right? What will characterize our examinations will be social distancing, inappropriate examination venues, and hyper-hygienic requirements. In a society that is plagued with time poverty, surely there are better ways of us assessing our young people's grasp, of knowledge. Colleagues, thank you. Questions, comments?
Okay, also.
Peter?
Thanks again, Sharon. I just was thinking about what you were saying in terms of the less independence of universities. I'm just wondering, there seems to be huge opportunities to collaborate across universities, but at the same time, universities, especially leaderships in universities, by that I mean, the senior management or whatever, are probably looking at the bare bones numbers on the accounts and survival as universities. I just wondered if you'd thought about how this cooperation could happen at the same time as helping universities survive, or do you think they need to merge those accounts? I don't know. Well, I just wonder how you think it's this less independent cooperation of universities, higher education institutions could possibly happen. Open to you.
Well, see, it's clear to me that we need to start cooperating with each other on a number of levels. How the cooperation happens, it should be between, people talk about the academic enterprise or the academic project. We are the academic project. It is us who needs to take that next step forward. I don't think we can fully rely on the management of the university to do that, because they have different objectives. Their objective is to rationalize, You know, they need to bring in the money. They need to make sure the university runs, or at least appears to be running. You know, I've recently moved over from an academic position to a slightly administrative, academic-ish type position. And what I see in that role is that I need to look at the finance, and I need to look at the number of students coming in. And when I was previously at a different level, I was more worried about my research, more worried about are my students, you know, getting the best value for money from me. Automatically that changes. I think us as the academics need to start taking, you know, the bull by the horn and saying, this is what we'd like to do. Martin?
You said something which really sort of described my life the last year, which was talking about communication by catapult and key stakeholders being ignored. And I've seen that the key stakeholder has been the dean. I've seen that the key stakeholder has been the guy who sits fielding student queries as a member of admin staff. I've seen it where the key stakeholder who's on a vote has been me. What would you say? What's the key things we need to do to deal with that? Because it's always been a problem. It's been heightened by COVID and everybody working at home.
You know, Martin, it's a really good question. What has happened, you know, with students increasingly using social media, and a small number of students who will complain, and that gets blown really out of proportion, significantly out of proportion. And all of a sudden you have this, what I call self-sabotage. So if the student goes and complains there, that stays over there for perpetuity. Right? The funders look and they say, we are not going to fund this university if their own people think that there is a problem. The entire culture and mindset set needs to change. You know, if you're a academic at a university or a student at a university, you've got to understand you belong to a particular type of ecosystem that you need to protect. You're not there to get everything that you can out of it and then bugger off after a while. That's what is happening. We see students come in, they get what they can, and then they leave. We see academics who come in, who bleed the system as much as they can, and then they leave. And we are leaving these massive gaps in the system that is very hard to plug. And the way it is being plugged is by administrative, policy-driven, bureaucratic approaches that doesn't really solve the problem. Let's find better ways or smarter ways of outwitting the system. So that's a concern. So how do we do that? I think it starts with us in the academic enterprise. We need to make the change.
Thank you. That's great.
We're being pestered to go to the other room.
Okay. Ooh, okay. See you there.
Okay, everybody. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thank you, Sharon.
To the next room.
Thank you.
Sharon, thanks very much. So for everybody who's here now, the webinar is continuing, but this will be the end of activities in this room. So if you'd like to make your way over to room 1, I'll put the link up here again in case you haven't got it to hand.
Thank you.